Have you been treating small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO, but not seeing the results that you were expecting? The classic recommendation for SIBO is a course of antimicrobials or antibiotics, but these only address part of the problem, eventually allowing symptoms to return. Well, today, I want to share with you the top 5 but easily avoidable mistakes that will allow you to finally resolve SIBO. Treating SIBO seems straightforward on the surface. You have an overgrowth, you treat the overgrowth, problem solved. Well, as you probably know, SIBO is almost never this straightforward. Instead, many find themselves on the SIBO merry-go-round, bouncing between periods of treatment with reduced symptoms and relapse. Is this something you can relate to? In today's video, we are going to address the top 5 mistakes that you can correct right away. But before we get started, if you think at the end of this video that I have given you the information that you came here for, hit that like and subscribe button and help me get this information out to other individuals that are in the same situation as you. Without further ado, let's jump into these top 5 mistakes that are extremely common when trying to deal with SIBO. At the very top of the list is treating too long. You're using the antimicrobials or the antibiotics for too long. I typically see scenarios where individuals have been on antimicrobials for 3 months, 4 months, even 6 months at a time. This is way too long. Really, an effective protocol against SIBO should only take 30 days. And the reason that these extended protocols are a problem is that we're disrupting the inherent microbiome to the gut. Yes, we want to get rid of these bacteria that don't need to be there, that have overgrown, but we also want to make sure that we're nurturing the species that are supposed to be there and that we're not inhibiting their growth patterns either. And when these protocols drag out for an extended period of time, especially when you start using some of the harsher antimicrobials, some of the harsher herbal or botanical antimicrobials, you can begin to deter the function of the beneficial species. And this is something that leads us to a point that is extremely critical when it comes to how we should think through SIBO. Many look at this as an eradication process. Eradication terminology and approaches lend themselves better to infections. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is not an infection, it's an overgrowth. So we don't have to completely eradicate these organisms. We just need to go through the process that's termed decontamination. We need to eliminate these organisms that are overgrowing, and get them back below where their baseline levels should be. It's not out of the norm to see these organisms that are typically seen with SIBO. It's not atypical to see them in the gastrointestinal tract, but it is atypical to see them in excessive numbers. So that's problem number 1, or mistake number 1, is treating for too long of a period of time. And that leads us right in to mistake number 2, which is, ironically, not treating aggressively enough, which is why many individuals probably make the mistake in number 1 of treating too long. We need to be more emphatic about the dose that is being used and make sure that the dose is not too low. We need a high enough dose with these antimicrobials, whether that's a botanical or an antibiotic. We need a high enough dose to be therapeutic, to be effective. And I'm going to spend most of our time speaking specifically to the antimicrobials, the herbal botanical antimicrobials, because that's where my expertise is. That's the realm that I operate in. And so when you use multiple of these antimicrobials together, you get a synergistic effect. You get a more pronounced decontamination effect. Remember, I'm using the term decontamination as the terminology to illustrate reducing the overall overgrowth, to reduce the load of bacteria that is what we often term the overgrowth. Now, what that looks like in practicality is you're generally combining more than one group of antimicrobials. So, for example, oil of oregano can be beneficial, extremely beneficial when it comes to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, but just solely relying on oil of oregano or just solely relying on garlic or whatever your botanical or herbal of choice is not the best strategy here. You need several of these antimicrobials working together to reduce the resistance and overcome these overgrowths and get those levels back under control. So problem or mistake number 2 is not using a high enough dose. Now, that leads us into problem number 3, and here we're going to move from talking about the antimicrobials to talking about food consumption, and specifically not necessarily what you eat, but how you eat. And interestingly, when it comes to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, how you eat seems to be more important than what you eat. Now, don't take that as a license to go eat whatever you want when it comes to managing your gut function and your microbiome, the balance of bacteria in your gut. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that how you eat needs to be defined by your 3 core meals per day: breakfast, lunch, dinner. We don't need to narrow down and consume fewer meals than that. That has some concerns as well. And we don't want to be snacking in between meals either. So let's talk about that latter point of snacking in between meals and why that can be a problem. Well, we have this neurological network in and around our gastrointestinal tract. In fact, it's our own gastrointestinal tract nervous system, typically termed the enteric nervous system. And a component to that enteric nervous system is what's known as the migratory motor complex. And the migratory motor complex has a natural sweeping motion of moving things down and inferior through the gastrointestinal tract from the small intestine into the large intestine. Many might term this as a component to peristalsis, which peristalsis is just your normal mechanistic movement of the smooth muscles of the GI tract that ultimately most of us perceive as a bowel movement, but it's that normal peristaltic activity. It's a component to that. But what is beneficial as it relates to SIBO is that moves the bacteria. It continues to promote the movement of bacteria from the small intestine into the large intestine. When you are constantly eating, you eat breakfast, you eat a mid-morning snack, you eat lunch, you eat a mid-afternoon snack, you eat dinner, you eat another snack in there somewhere, you are inhibiting that natural sweeping motion, and you're not allowing the nervous system to act as an ally to helping you overcome SIBO. So that's mistake number 4. So only eat those 3 core meals. Now, mistake number 4 is not consuming enough protein. And yes, I alluded to this earlier, diet does matter, right? So I don't want you to just throw diet out the window, but diet does matter. And too much attention, for example, when it comes to diet and SIBO, there's far, far too much attention placed on the FODMAPs diet. And if you want to understand more about why the FODMAPs diet is not a good recommendation, check out this video link above. I delve into it and you can have some insight into that and maybe hopefully change your position on how you're consuming food. So remember, we want to focus on protein in the diet. That should be a key component. So we want to stop this idea of diets that are geared towards avoiding things, and we want to move towards a dietary model of what we should be including. So when it comes to protein, there's a range of protein that we're trying to shoot for, and that's going to be about 1.8 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. Now, in fairness, we're in the United States. We don't operate in grams and kilograms for the most part. So 2.2 grams per kilogram is equivalent to 1 gram per pound of body weight. So if you're not consuming 1 gram per pound of body weight yet, then start at about 0.75 to 0.8 grams per pound, and that'll give you a baseline as to whether or not you're consuming enough protein. And so to give you an idea of about how much this is, for a 150-pound individual, that's approximately 123 to about 150 grams per day that they should be eating. And in terms of the type of proteins that we want here, animal proteins are superior. That's just the reality of it. You're going to have a better array of your complete amino acids in your animal-based protein. And the reason that these, including the protein in, makes a difference is that protein is going to support the immune system. It's going to help balance the microbiota. It will take a little bit of time there, a couple of weeks, maybe a few days to a couple of weeks to get this to shift. And when I say a couple of weeks, 2.5 at max, something like that. And then this is also because those protein sources are helping produce something known as branch chain fatty acids. Some of you that are more versed in this conversation around the gut may be familiar with things like short chain fatty acids. Well, we also can get branch chain fatty acids, and these are derived from the amino acids that are coming from the proteins in the diet. And the other benefit when it comes to the getting good quality proteins in the diet is that these are not a driver of dysbiosis. They actually help promote a more balanced microbial state in the gut. So mistake number 4 is not getting in enough protein, easily overcome by getting in the right amounts of protein in your diet. Okay, so we've gotten through these 4. Let's go to the 5th mistake that is very, very commonly seen when we talk about SIBO. And again, this is number 5. I've given you a list here, and I want you to go back and work through all of these because implementing these is going to change your future when it comes to dealing with SIBO. So number 5 is not focusing, or I'm sorry, let me say this differently. Let me say it in a more a different direction. Number 5 is thinking that decontamination is the only step in the process of dealing with SIBO. So what that means is that the approach by the clinician or by you as the individual trying to manage this is that you took the antimicrobials or you took an antibiotic, and when you finished that, you felt like, I'm done. There's nothing else for me to do. That was what I needed to do to deal with SIBO. Here's what I'm going to inform you on. That is only step number 1 of a bigger 3-step process that you need to be dealing with. What you have forgotten is that there needs to be a restoration of your digestive secretions. So the acid in your stomach, the bile from your gallbladder, the pancreatic enzymes. These are all factors that need to be considered. The motility of the bowels, the factors that influence the motility of the bowels. If the bowels are too slow or if they're sluggish, that's going to predispose you to more of a SIBO type of profile in your gut and likely cause you to become symptomatic. And then you also have to correct the nutrient deficiencies. SIBO, one of the characteristics of SIBO is actually nutrient deficiencies, right? So if you have SIBO, you should just consider that you have nutrient deficiencies. The question is, what nutrient deficiencies do you have? Now, we can theorize on this and say that you probably have mineral deficiencies like zinc, selenium, iron. You have fat-soluble nutrient deficiencies, A, D, E, K. B vitamin deficiencies are very common here. Protein malnutrition. Again, I alluded to this with our mistake number 4. That's very common. You really need to get those corrected as well because the presence of those nutrients going through your gastrointestinal tract also helps positively shape the profile of the bacteria in your GI tract and ultimately helps move you away from this SIBO profile in your gut to a more balanced profile in your gut. So in addition to dealing with the antimicrobials and using those aggressively for a 30-day period of time, so I'm making sure that as I'm suggesting these to you that we're using the correct strategies here, you also want to follow up and note, do you have digestive secretions that you need to address? Do you need to address the motility of your bowels? And what nutrient deficiencies do you have that need to be corrected? Okay, so there you have it. Those are the top 5 mistakes that are easily avoidable and can be corrected when it comes to dealing with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth symptoms. Now, if this information was helpful to you, after you hit that like and subscribe button there, I want you to go and take a look at the video on the screen. It will share with you what the real cause of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is.